And they said, did your clients come up with that idea or did we train them that they should hire us in that manner? And did we explain to them all the risks that we couldn't quantify and why they needed to hire us in that way?
Welcome to the AEC Growthcast from PSMJ Resources, hosted by President Gregory Hart. This no theory, no fluff episode shares real takeaways from the top AEC experts who know what works in today's competitive market.
Welcome to this episode of the AEC Growthcast. My name is Greg Hart, president here at PSMJ Resources. Glad to have you here with me. We have a whole bunch of stuff we're going to get to in this episode. We're talking about AI, we're talking about marketing, we're talking about just about every facet of firm management in some way, shape, or form. So I do hope you find one or two or three or five or 10 good ideas that you can take away and implement at your AEC firm. One of the things that jumped out at me was some data that came out regarding AI adoption in the AEC industry. So I want to dig into that a little bit and the why behind what's going on there. It's actually a little bit lower than I would have thought or than you might have thought. And we're going to dig into that a little bit. We're going to talk about how rising stars can become tomorrow's leaders in a great conversation with Heather Polinsky, who's the CEO of Arcadis. I want to talk about why growth and culture don't always have to be at odds. They can work together. They don't always have to fight against each other. I want to talk about how marketing is broken in our industry and a new book that aims to give some tips and advice and insight to fix marketing in the industry, particularly in your firm. So great show. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. I don't want to take too much of your time here because, like I said, we've got a lot to cover. Let's get started with the metric of the month. 27. That's the number that we've got this month. So a recent study by Bluebeam, which is a software company serving the AEC space, found that AI adoption in the AEC industry is about 27%. That is to say that 27% of firms report that they are using AI in their operations in some meaningful way, shape, or form. Now, that shouldn't come as too much of a surprise because for those of you who've been paying attention, PSMJ did a study last summer. We asked it a little bit differently or looked at it a little bit differently. 27% are using it in their operations. We found that 67% are not. So just about 2/3 of AEC firms were in nothing but the early experimental phase of AI. In other words, not using it in a meaningful, sustained way in their operations. So what does that mean? Why is that? When we did the research last summer, a lot of the concerns we found were around data security, privacy, quality, what you might hear is the pretty common reactions or logical concerns about AI. I think those are pretty superficial in a lot of cases for a lot of organizations, especially as we start to build kind of small language models and more custom tools. I think you can address a lot of those. It seems to me there's some bigger issues at play, and this is certainly something that could be up for debate. I think part of the issue, and maybe we see this a little less so in other industries, not only have clients not been really asking for it, clients have initially, especially in the public sector side, were sort of against it. They seem to be coming around. I think they're seeing that the opportunity and the momentum in AI, and seems like a lot of procurement guidelines are now centered around sort of controlled usage, subject to a bunch of criteria. Plus, we're a little unlike a lot of other industries. Any professional services business is subject to this, not just AEC, but in a lot of cases, a lot of the business model is built around selling time. And now, especially over the past several years, firms have been really, really busy. You're focused on the urgent, the right now, the client deadlines, and you're not really incentivizing or motivating or encouraging project managers, other folks who are the highly available professionals to kind of get knocked offline to explore and play around in sandboxes with respect to AI. There hasn't been a sense of urgency to address that, as there has some of the backlog that lies before you. The ones who are starting to move the needle on AI seem to be the ones that are actually carving out some intentional time to focus and invest in AI. What do I mean by that? Give individuals a couple hours a month or set up a little task group of 4 or 5 individuals to be kind of an AI task force to scout out, smoke out some problems or friction points in the organization and give them a box of time, a budget, whatever the case may be, maybe a few hours a week or a few days a month or something to that effect to start to play around with it and to start to come up with some ideas. That seems to be where the traction is happening right now. But again, not a lot of adoption in our industry. And when I have conversations with folks around the industry, I hear of some fantastic use cases. As we get into agentic AI, as we move from generative to agentic, some use cases around project change assistance. So when there's a scope change in a project, looking at the scheduling impact, the budgeting impact, the materials cost impact, pursuit coordinators, agentic pursuit coordinators that are looking at RFPs, drafting up proposals, putting resources together. So what I mean by that, where generative is kind of reactive, right? You put in a prompt in ChatGPT and it comes up with an answer. Agentic is almost proactively starting to find potential solutions and find ideas. I hope 2026, one of your kind of strategic priorities is to get your arms around this and tech and innovation and where your firm is going and where the use cases, the low risk, high return use cases might be in 2026. So that's our metric of the month. Hope you got some value out of that. I certainly found it interesting to go through that exercise of looking at how we compare to other industries and where the issues might be. Now it's time to move into our featured guest for this month's episode. We have a fantastic conversation with Heather Polinsky. Heather's the CEO of Arcadis, the global design engineering consultancy firm with about 34,000 employees worldwide. For those of you not familiar with it, Arcadis, the company helps public and private clients tackle complex challenges across the infrastructure, water, environment, energy, transport, and buildings markets. In our conversation, we talk about leadership, we talk about innovation, we talk about what the future of our industry might look like, could look like. Really exciting conversation. So let's get in and let's hear what Heather has to say. Heather, thanks so much for joining me here.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Nice to see you again.
It's nice to see you too. It's been a few years since you spoke at our AEC Thrive conference, which was the first Thrive conference coming out of COVID. So a lot has changed since then, but maybe a lot hasn't changed too. All sorts of things I want to talk to you about, from leadership to technology to kind of what the future of the industry looks like. But maybe where we start is just tell me a little bit, how did you get to where you are as CEO of Arcadis? Tell us in a nutshell your career and the pathway it took.
Well, I started my career actually working for a client. So I started in the consulting space after working for the Army. I was a civilian for 5 years, and I got the opportunity to do a lot of things that probably right out of college most people aren't able to do. And then I decided to move into consulting, and I joined a company called Malcolm Kearney at the time. At first, I thought, well, I don't want to work in public sector. I want to move into private sector. And so I started doing private sector jobs. I did sampling. I did phase ones. I basically did anything someone asked me to do because I wanted to learn. And then I quickly realized that I had a differentiated skill because I understood our federal clients because I had worked for one. And so I started doing more work with our federal business and really looking to leverage. I worked on one project and then I would move it to the next project. There was one client that had a need. I would get involved and move it to another. And probably the biggest decision I made early on in that time was to get involved in professional services organizations like Society of American Military Engineers, for example, I got involved in. And I met a lot of people in the industry. I learned a lot from everyone that I met. I made relationships and contacts and got involved in the boards and really started to understand what others were doing around me and learn from them. And that really helped me in building those relationships. And I quickly moved into kind of client development and program management and just started to diversify the organizations inside Malcolm Kearney that I worked with, and then also within some of the organizations outside in the industry. Then I started to get interested in operations, and I had the opportunity. Someone asked me if I would be willing to sit on the board of Malcolm Kearney, which gave me a huge vantage point. And I was able to give a perspective of the people in the organization working. And then Malcolm Kearney was acquired by Arcadis. And I thought to myself, gosh, this is a big change. We're going from a 1,700 person company to a 17,000 person company. I, for a minute, was like, is this what I want to do? And you know what I did? I went for a run one day and I said, you know what? When I get home from this run, I'm going to decide if this is for me. And if it is, I'm all in. And that was close to 20 years ago. And then I started at Arcadis doing the same thing. I was working with clients, engaging with our federal programs. And one day I realized that maybe I wasn't challenging myself enough and that the team I had worked with was the same team I had worked with for so long. So I went to our leadership and I said, listen, I love doing what I'm doing and I can keep doing it. there's an opportunity to do something different. I just wanted to let you know I'm interested. And then about 6 months later, one of the leaders came to me and said, "Hey, would you like to move into operations from client development?" I thought, okay. I actually moved 2 levels down in the organization when I moved into the role. People thought I was crazy. But from there, I was seen to be able to really excel in operations. And I moved on to be the COO of our North American business. I had a plan. I thought I knew what I was doing. And then COVID hit, and it became a very different position and a very different job. And then as soon as that started to slow down, I started to get back to the original plan because business started to become a little bit more normal, or the new normal. And my leadership came to me and said, "We're changing the structure of Arcadis. Would you like to apply for a position that was global?" I was responsible for our resilience business, which is everything climate, energy, water, and environment. And they said, "Well, you could also apply for our global operations leadership role." And someone gave me some great advice. They said, "Don't make it too easy for them to select you for the operations role, because they know you in operations today. They don't know you as the P&L leader of one of the largest businesses in Arcadis." So that was the hardest thing I've ever done, is to actually say, "Yeah, I think I can do this new job." And it was a big change. It was global. It was 12 countries. It was about 12,000 people. And I took the advice, no matter how hard it was. And I was selected to do that role. And then from there, I was asked to take on our mobility business and work with our team that does all the transportation work: road, rail, urban transit. And so I was running about 2/3 of the business. And then just recently, I was asked to step in as the CEO. So I guess, the message is, I just took things that came to me and I asked. And I was a little bold. And sometimes I took a little bit of a risk to learn more.
Seems like you were curious too, and especially curious about the operational side. That's a part of the business. I mean, we see it at PSMJ all the time that people often go a whole career without having a real understanding of it. And that curiosity to just kind of want to learn it and jump into it. Looking back, that was probably the test that was put on you with getting on the board of Malcolm Perney. That was sort of, let's see if she's really got what it takes to make it happen. So one of the things we hear from a lot of firms that are struggling with ownership transition, which is usually more leadership transition, is getting that next generation to step up. And the exiting existing incumbent, whatever you want to call it, generation is sort of this mindset of, when are they going to step up? When are they going to take on some accountability, responsibility, whatever the case may be? And then next generation, when you kind of pull them aside, are often saying, when are they going to get out of the way? When are they going to make some room for this next generation of leadership to step up? Now, the right answer in a lot of those cases is a little bit of both. But oftentimes when we see those sort of break that stalemate, if you will. So that was probably part of the Malcolm Perney experience and others along the way. There is a little bit of, leaders absolutely need to make space and encourage that kind of ownership. But there's also, on your side, that curiosity and initiative to, I want to learn this. I want to figure this out.
Absolutely. What I've seen is that, especially technical people, or even maybe women, they don't ask for these opportunities because they don't recognize the importance for the future. By one asking where the gaps are from a technical perspective, and commercial fluency, financial literacy is absolutely one of the things that we need to get our people exposed to, especially those people that we see potential and opportunity for. It's also the fact that capital is really about how that works. And I'm learning that stepping into the CEO role, things that my CEO had exposed me to on the investment side, on the investor side, which is very different than what you deal with even when you're running an operation. So you're still always going to learn something new getting in to be the actual leader for this, but understanding financing structures and risk allocation and incentive models and things like that are opportunities for people to learn even beyond the project financials and the company P&L.
On that note, just kind of next generation leaders, it does seem like, look, as you mentioned, even just in the time since you and I last spoke, coming out of the pandemic and things have changed quite a bit. But are there some traits that you think kind of future emerging leaders need now that maybe were less important 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Well, I think when we see commercial fluency, we just talked about that. And also understanding the geopolitical environment, the supply chain challenges around you and your customers, understanding how climate risk affects you as a business. So, really being able to put that full context around the financial performance, not just within your organization, but outside of the organization, because it drives strategy, it drives decision making, it drives investment. Commercial judgment is one of the areas that I would say is really important. Another area that is definitely wasn't even something you and I were talking about in 2021 when we met is the digital judgment and pairing that with leadership and authentic leadership. AI was something we weren't talking about. Maybe we were starting to talk about natural language processing, AI and digital intelligence, those types of topics. Today, you have to be fluent in, you have to understand, and you have to really think about not just the technical aspects of those, but how do you get the cultural adoption? And how do you not waste time when you're getting that cultural adoption and keep your teams focused on things that can scale and have bigger impacts, whether it's digital tools or it's applying AI to create efficiency internal, efficiency external, or maybe even creating new business models associated with these digital tools for our clients along the lines of maybe digitally enhanced data analysis and AI predictive analysis using some of the asset related data that you have. Think about who and how we're going to transform. We're going to need people that can both bring that human judgment and the technical aspect of those digital tools to life. And that means that the people that we put into leadership positions today have to be curious, as you mentioned earlier. They have to be able to think about trends, economic cycles. They also have to be able to look in a much broader basis. So maybe systems thinking. It's not just looking at one asset, it's how that infrastructure connects. And in our world, that's energy, water, mobility, data centers. All of this is starting to come interconnected. So if you're a technical leader that isn't thinking about the entire system, you're not going to advance as quickly as someone who is really thinking about how things are connected, how sectors are crossing, how our clients' needs are changing, and not just thinking about the direct impact of decisions, but what are the secondary impacts and tertiary impacts. And then the last part I would say is building partnerships. One of the things that I think helped my career was the connection within the industry, not just within my organization. And that included clients, it included partners, it included competitors. And building that relationship is so important, not just for your own personal career and your own personal growth, but for the companies. None of us have all the answers today. In fact, none of us can make the investments that we need to make in order to continue to transform our businesses alone. So we have to have partnerships, and those partnerships, even in areas that are outside of your technical area or outside your company's technical area, are going to be so important. We have partnerships like with Jupiter Intelligence for climate resilience and Nirixon for information on predictive maintenance for bridges. But those companies don't exist in our industry, they're in other industries. Maybe all this comes down to that curiosity and continuous learning that we talked about earlier, and maybe non-linear thinking, so that you can think about what changes are coming tomorrow, and building that in for your career will also be helpful for your company. And the people today that are entering the industry and that we want to enter the industry, that shift and that change is going to be way faster than it was for you and I.
Isn't that crazy? Back to 2021. I mean, there were students who were just entering college at that time that, and even students who entered a year or two later who are now starting to come out the other end that know nothing other than this very digital landscape that we're in. And even in the past 24 months or 18 months, it's evolved so much. But I think in a lot of ways, super exciting time to be a young professional entering this space. There's a great opportunity, I think, in this industry, in the AEC space, to really have an impact on the world around us. And the technological piece and the digital piece, the more you're curious about that and embracing it, and even questioning sort of, well, why are we doing it that way? Or what if? It does seem like it's often looking at what's a pain point, what's a friction point, what's a problem, or something we don't want to do, or we don't enjoy doing, or we're just candidly not good at, and that we might be able to embrace technology.
I heard a story about an industry that is different than ours, nursing, for example. And I think we all go to doctors and nurses, and they spend very little time with us, actually, with physically with us. And when you add digital tooling or AI to the experience, what's going to happen is that your nurses will be able to spend more time with you, your doctors will be able to spend more time with you, and the quality of the engagement goes up. It's the same thing for our industry. Let's stop doing the things that don't add a lot of value or that we can get more routine support for so that we can really provide that insight, that judgment. It's very difficult to manage stakeholder involvement, but if we put more energy towards those things that require judgment and a human interaction and connection, I think we will create more positive outcomes in the work that we do, even beyond the engineering side of it or the architecture.
So on the technology piece, so we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about this a little bit, but where are some areas are you seeing it kind of impact project outcomes, or what's your overall temperature take on kind of the impact of AI on AEC right now?
We can see the impact if you look at the fluctuations in the market, for example, and the concerns that people are seeing about AI on engineering and architecture. It's in the headlines. It's in the headlines for many, many industries. It really comes down to data. I mean, these things feed, they eat data for breakfast. And so we have a very data rich environment. And that data is going to help us in creating greater certainty, not in a reactive way, which we sometimes are working now in, but providing better predictability. And that's where the differentiation is going to lie for us. And that's where the real impact's going to be. And I mean, we're already seeing this predictive asset management, digital twins for infrastructure planning, AI assisted environmental modeling, portfolio level optimizations. So, where does capital get spent? We see this specifically in water, in property, in transportation. It seems kind of simplistic, but the pace at which these advancements are evolving is going faster and faster. And the solutions, some of them are bespoke and others are really viable and scalable. And it's going to take us a bit of time to get those outcomes through. I see the outcomes, as I mentioned, in three areas. One is in internal efficiency. How do we run our companies more efficiently and effectively and create a good employee experience or even better employee experience? The second is how do we run our projects and deliver the work that we do more effectively and efficiently using predictive analytics? So instead of looking backwards and saying, oh, there's a trend that we have to be concerned about, or there's an incident or a risk that's come to realization, we should be able to predict that. So internally focused and then externally focused. We talked about that data side of things. And then I believe that there is another element, which we haven't necessarily cracked yet, which is what are the things we don't do for our clients today that we will do because of these digital tools and technology. So I don't think that the biggest shift is the individual tools. I believe that the biggest shift is when we integrate those tools and we're able to use analytics and digital engineering, and that helps us in doing better scenario planning and better risk modeling. And then we start to get into that predictive element instead of the reactive element. The firms that win won't be the ones that have the most tools. They're going to be the ones that know how to integrate the tools with the people and then know how to scale them with discipline.
And the ones with the most quality data, I think that is something that you're absolutely right. Us as an industry are sitting on mountains of data that can be harnessed and used in a lot of different ways and have a much more valuable impact, I think, on our clients, which is really a great it totally changes the kind of business model away from selling time and selling design to really selling value at a whole different level, especially in the building systems and things like that. This is the challenge I think a lot of firms have with innovation is, and look, for a lot of firms, everybody's just really busy right now and they're just grinding away. And it's easier to look at kind of the challenges that are right in front of you than the ones that are a little further down the road. But how do you create kind of a broader culture of innovation without becoming kind of overly bureaucratic or overly process driven?
First of all, I think it's tough. I think the
Yeah.
balance is between citizen development and ideas that get generated in your organization to scaling those and controlling them so that they actually provide value. And we see studies, everyone's seen studies to say that we haven't seen AI create tangible value yet, but yet we have a lot of people spending time learning it, applying it, and so much investment, obviously, in data centers around it. So innovation doesn't necessarily scale through centralization, but it does through clarity. So actually, I think you need to be clear on what your firm does and what the problems are that you're trying to solve. And then the culture starts to align around that clarity instead of having it just be disparate throughout the whole organization. And then you can put some guardrails around experimentation, some expectations around experimentation, and then make sure that you have mechanisms to share what's working within the organization and a team that can really help identify when that scaling is possible. And that's really the part that is critical. So we can all develop these bespoke opportunities to apply digital tools or technology. And we're all doing pilots. In fact, Arcadis launched a AI pilot for water, and we're doing one for energy now. And we have a number of digital mobility tools, for example. And we encourage that local experimentation, but getting from that experimentation and that successful client implementation to actually elevate those models across a global platform, ensuring that they're viable, that they drive commercial value, and that we can maintain them. And this is where companies react with bureaucracy. But in reality, it's about clarity. It's about creating that North Star on what you want to do, how you can channel that entrepreneurial spirit of your people and balance it with commerciality as well as purpose to create a culture of innovation. And I would not say that I can say we've perfected it, but we're definitely on that journey.
Yeah, it is the risk manager in all of us, I guess, is to just sort of lock it down and put a bunch of and you need the guardrails, of course, but to just sort of stifle any sort of bottom up. That's the tricky part is I think a lot of the great innovation is coming from deep in the organization. And I like that you're creating a culture to kind of let that percolate a little bit. And maybe 1 out of 10 actually rises up and maybe even less than that turns into something that's got some legs, but to not stifle that with everything you can't do.
In order to create an environment where we can continue to invest and get returns as a company, we also need to change the contractual mechanisms that we use and that are how our clients hire us. And so training our people at the same time they're developing technology to have conversations with our clients about how to hire us a different way and how risk and reward go hand in hand and to create opportunities for us. I actually have referred back to a PSMJ conversation that I recall from the time I was with you. And you had a whole session, didn't you? It was on Is the Timesheet Dead or something like that?
Yes, you're right. You're right. You're right. Yep.
I think back to that and I really refer in my mind to when we get to a point where we're not beholden to the timesheet and the billable hour as an industry, then we'll know we're really there from an innovation perspective because we're creating value and not being measured on a unit basis. But it requires all of us to talk to our clients about the benefits and the risks associated with this and make sure that we go into more co-creation with our clients. We're seeing some clients being willing to go through things called the vested approach. It's developed by the University of Tennessee, and it's a co-creation and a relationship model versus a transactional model. Most of what we operate in today is transactional, and in order for innovation to really grow, we have to move from transactional to more relational models. And we're really trying to, with especially our biggest clients and those that we have the greatest trusting relationship with, have conversations about how we can change how we work together in order to allow for innovation to come through and to develop it with our clients. When we develop those innovative tools with our clients, we see it being much more scalable because we truly understand what their needs are.
Yeah, you're solving for a pain point first and foremost. Yeah, the notion of getting away from the time-based model is nothing new. Like that was 2021. We've been talking about that for quite some time, and it's always been turning the super tanker a bit for an industry that's been built on the billable hour. But geez, this seems like we are closer than ever to just that model just breaks. It just simply does not work anymore. So whereas before it was a little more maybe abstract for a lot of smaller firms to think about breaking free from the time-based, hour-based model, you're kind of forced into it now, which is exciting. And I think that's really, really where the opportunity is. But none of these solutions tie back to how many hours we build to the project, right?
No. And most often we create the greatest innovation when we're not in those kinds of relationships with our clients. And we can point to a number of them in that sense. I have this vision of a company that doesn't drive its performance based on the billable hour. And I hope that in my tenure, we'll be able to get there. It's a big, lofty dream, as you point out, because it requires our clients to change with us and the industry to change with us. But imagine when we have this conversation in a few years and we've made progress. One of the consultants that I was talking to actually challenged me. I said, "Oh, our clients are still hiring us in cost plus and time and materials modes. How will we get to this?" And they said, "Did your clients come up with that idea, or did we train them that they should hire us in that manner? And
Mhm.
did we explain to them all the risks that we couldn't quantify and why they needed to hire us in that way?" Back to that efficiency conversation we had earlier and the predictive analytics on our own performance in addition to our clients. The more we could do that, the better we can get at controlling the risks that we see in our projects. It all comes together.
It's funny too, and I think about definitely think certainly in our professional lifetimes we'll see some dramatic change in the business model. I think part of it is too we talked about a while ago the generational change, the kind of digital natives or AI natives, I guess if you will, that are coming into the workforce now. They're not nearly as married to that's the way the business model has to be. So I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the future of the industry. 'Cause I think you always have an interesting kind of perspective on where things are going and what changes are sort of maybe a little more transient and what's a bit more structural. I think certainly getting away from the billable kind of hour model is one that is certainly structural and certainly here. I think it's hard to make the argument otherwise on that. Any other kind of big structural changes you see coming to the industry in the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years?
Yeah, well, digital integration across the life cycle, we've talked a lot about that, is clearly structural. It will become not a competitive advantage, it'll become the baseline expectation from everything from planning to operations. And the convergence across sectors, where I've talked about previously energy, mobility, water, data center infrastructure, power, critical minerals, is coming together. It's no longer isolation. You can't just be in one sector, you have to be across this. The electrification and grid modernization and data centers all coming together, and it's more of a systems approach than separate. That's going to become more and more critical for our industry. Climate resilience and being able to make a connection between the work our industry does and the competitive advantage of our clients is also going to be really important. And when I speak on competitive advantage, it's both for private companies and also public. Talking about cities and attracting people to come to cities and communities and really be able to drive that economic resilience. You need that climate resilience. And we've always talked about some of these topics kind of separate from the economic influences that they drive, but they all have an economic component to it. So how we present ourselves and why the assets matter is no longer just about the asset itself. It's actually about the ecosystem that it operates in. It's about the economic certainty that it creates by having a strong infrastructure, both on the private and public side. And then the last piece is talent expectation. It's fundamentally evolved. And we know that we have an aging workforce, and how we reshape work with things like the gig economy and how professional organizations will remain competitive and provide the best talent. Is that going to require flexibility and purpose and growth pathways that people can learn the most working for your company than someone else? People like me who have spent 27 years with a company might not be the normal route into the future. And that creates some structural workforce realities. And, it's not temporary trends. It's really us thinking about how do we reshape our industry to allow for that. And that's very different than some of the more transient or cyclical items and things like market softness or procurement slowdowns or political shifts. Those things come and they go, and we have to kind of be consistent. But I do think that structural change will require us to rewrite some of the rules that we know. Starting back from the very beginning, when you asked me about leadership and what we need to, and how we prepare people to lead our organizations into the future, it shows why you need that systems thinking and that curiosity, because the way that we'll operate into the future is going to require agility to drive growth and agility to stay viable and continue to create value for our competitors and shareholders.
You bet. An exciting time to be in the industry for sure. And I think an exciting time with a lot of opportunities ahead. No doubt about that. Heather, thanks so much for joining me. Lots of great insight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg.
Okay, now we're going to move on to what we call our 5-minute fix. This is the part of the podcast where we take a question from a PSMJ Pro member and dissect that and try to answer it in 5 minutes. If you're not a PSMJ Pro member, check out the link in the show notes to learn how to become one, and you can submit a question for the 5-minute fix as well in the future. So here we go. Latest question we got for the 5-minute fix. Our engineering firm is fully employee owned. The leadership team often talks about interest in growth and expansion. However, as opportunities and ideas present themselves, we're usually quick to dismiss them due to the, quote, impacts on our culture and, quote, why mess with our success? How can we honestly reconcile a collective intrigue in growth with the fear of change? That is a very, very common issue that happens in AEC firms all day, every day. And it's not a lack of clarity, really, in the sense of not knowing what you're doing. It's not really hypocrisy either. It's just the clash of two different forces, sort of this economic logic of the business of growth, and then that sort of identity preservation piece of saying, well, we know who we are, or we're comfortable with who we are as a firm, and why should we change that? There's two pieces to it. Number one, I think it's a really helpful exercise to go through and define what do we actually mean by the culture that we like or don't like, or what we do or don't want to change. And let's go through and actually articulate, how do we define as a leadership team our culture right now, the current state, and what is our visionary culture? What do we want to be in the future? What do we actually not want to change? What do we actually like and not like about our culture now? Hot take, standing still and not growing is actually more risky to your culture than growing the firm and accessing all of the other resources that are beneficial for a healthy, sustainable organization. What the heck do I mean by that? So I'm assuming that the firm has been growing at a fairly modest rate, let's say low single digits in annual growth. And the idea on the table is, should we grow more aggressively, 10, 15% per year? Okay. So when you're looking at those two scenarios, if that is the case, if you're not growing, you can't support kind of capitalization of the firm, right? You can't support funding ownership transition or ownership programs, if you will, to continue to keep the company well capitalized. But if you're not growing, it makes it a lot harder to figure out a ownership transition plan. So if you're one of the ones who's been in the firm for a while and maybe thinking about planning your exit, you actually want growth because you want growth to be able to fund your retirement and your buyout of equity in the firm. Growth certainly provides opportunities for development for employees as well. So if you like the culture of the firm right now, where people are presumably highly engaged, highly productive, and really enjoying what they do, those people will eventually matriculate up or out of the organization. Your star performers, if they don't see a pathway to growth and development in the firm, they'll find that pathway somewhere else. The other piece I would add, if you're not growing and your competition all around you is growing, they're getting more diversified. They're adding more disciplines, adding more geographic reach, adding more talent, whatever the case may be. If you're not doing that, okay, then you're shrinking. And not only are you shrinking, you're giving the competition an opportunity to eat the lunch. We tend to think of growth as this big monolithic thing, but the reality is not all growth is equal. If you want to make kind of a low risk, potentially still moderate to high return growth expansion play, I would argue geographic expansion is a great place to start, right? Same discipline, same services, same client markets, but broader geographic expansion. I would argue adding a new discipline is certainly higher risk. Entering a new client market, I think, is higher risk as well. Not all growth is created equal. So if you want to start small and you want to start easy, try geographic expansion. Culture is also a really subjective, squishy thing for a lot of AEC firms. Culture also is very perishable in AEC firms. And if it's not preserved and taught and reinforced throughout time, I don't care whether you're growing or not, the culture will start to get diluted, especially if you start to lose some of your cultural champions through natural attrition and retirement and things like that. Number one, if you're not growing, you're going to be at risk in a lot of other ways. And number two, think about that in terms of not all growth is equal, and think about a strategic plan and a vision for your firm's future that you can control, that you're intentionally in charge of, and you're dictating, and not the whims of the market. So There you go. That's the 5-minute fix. If you have a question that you would like to submit for a 5-minute fix in the future, just become a PSMJ Pro member and you can submit your questions there and we'll get to them. We're getting so many. They're a lot of fun and hopefully they're helpful. Now we're moving on to the book of the month. This is a segment where I talk about a book that I've recently read. As I said, this will, I think, always be nonfiction, but I will not rule out that maybe we talk about a novel sometime, AEC leadership, a love story or something. I don't know. Maybe that'll come up. But for now, it's going to be nonfiction. And this month, I had the pleasure of speaking at the Smartegy Smart Win conference. AEC marketers, AEC business development folks, and AEC executives largely talking about the future of AEC marketing and business development. And the book that we're going to talk about on that note this month is The Modern AEC Marketer, written by Judy Sparks, who's the founder and CEO of Smartegy, a marketing agency for AEC firms. And this book is kind of a call to action, largely for kind of millennial and Gen Z marketers to step up, take hold, and shake things up. A lot of the change that's happening on our side, AEC firms, is happening on the client side as well. So Sparks makes the point that selection committees look a lot different now, with a lot of millennials and even upper end of the Gen Z spectrum starting to show up in selection committees, procurement committees, which is changing the dynamic as well, because of course they have grown up in a world around very kind of short attention spans. And she points out that now when you're walking into those interviews, in those presentations, they've already done a whole bunch of digital research and know a lot more about you than you think. In AEC marketing, talking about how so many firms are stuck in what she calls the bottom of the funnel. And that is sort of chasing RFPs, reacting to opportunities, not getting into the kind of top of funnel or what she calls full funnel approach, which is really taking that effort to create awareness, build demand, at a very strategic level. It isn't about chasing more. It isn't about getting faster in terms of getting proposals out. It's really about getting more strategic and maybe being everything to a smaller group of people rather than being something to everybody. She gave an example in the book about HOK in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta and how HOK actually had not wanted to pursue that project at first. They just didn't feel like it was the right fit for them. They didn't want to go after it. But the owner sort of kept coming to them saying, hey, we really want you in this. We really want you in this, because of their reputation, of course, expertise in stadiums and everything that precedes them. Of course, the rest is history with HOK being a part of that project. But she pointed out that was the branding piece. That was the upstream full funnel branding piece at work, in that they created awareness, created demand. So when there were opportunities that presented themselves, everybody said, we know that firm. I've seen their stuff. She kind of makes this argument, not every opportunity deserves your effort. You should know what is coming before it actually comes. If you're just hearing about something, by the time it's an RFP, you're already too late. Somebody's already out-marketed their way to it in front of you, and your best future work usually comes from work you have. So she kind of gets into what she calls the scalable 6, which are 6 different elements of the strategy, from branding to account-based marketing to digital marketing to communications and talent. You can use to kind of ask yourself specific questions to implement her scalable 6 and implement some of the tactics that have been built up over decades in the industry. So give that one a read if you're looking for something new on your book list. The Modern AEC Marketer. Hopefully we've given you a whole bunch of stuff to be thinking about and to be looking at as you kind of plot out your firm's moves. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, whatever you need to do on your various channels where you consume these podcasts, so we can keep bringing more of this stuff to you. If you're a PSMJ Pro member, be sure to get those questions in for a 5-minute fix. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.